Good evening and welcome to the ADA Primer webinar series. Today is the second of 4 webinars in the ADA Primer webinar series. The title of today's session is Serving Customers with Disabilities. The ADA Primer webinar series is hosted by the Virgin Islands Small Business Development Center in collaboration with the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands. My name is Mary Jo Williams and I'm the moderator for today's session. The VISBDC, for those of you that are not familiar with us, is a joint venture arrangement between the U.S. Small Business Administration and the University of the Virgin Islands. The VISBDC provides technical assistance to people that are looking to start a business, people who are looking to grow their business, and people who want to go out of business. The VISBDC can provide assistance for businesses that fall anywhere along that continuum. We do not give loans and we do not give grants. We service the entire U.S. Virgin Islands. The St. Croix office is located at 6300 Estate Peters Rest next to the Sprint T-Mobile office. And on St. Thomas, our office is located on the 2nd floor of the Niski Center, upstairs of the Navy and the Marine recruiting offices. We are continuing to work remotely. So please visit our website, our Facebook page, call us or email us for assistance. This session is being recorded and is being presented live on Facebook. Now, our presenter for today's session is Ms. Shami Carr. Shami has been in the disability field for over 20 years, first as an advocate for parents who have children in special education. After being an advocate, Shami worked as the Director of Advocacy and Case Management at an independent living center, and then eventually as a regional technical assistance manager at Cornell's University Employment and Disability Institute. At Cornell, Shami worked with various stakeholder groups such as employer associations, system advocates, state and local governments, and educational entities, including K through 12 schools and colleges. She has been trained by the Department of Justice and Equal Employment Opportunity Center. More recently, Shami worked as a program coordinator with VIUSED at the University of the Virgin Islands as a Ticket to Work coordinator at the local at the local One Stop in Ithaca, New York. Her current position as an advocate with the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands entails her doing trainings for parents, support groups, and work with various employment entities such as VIDOL, Department of Labor, vocational rehab, along with business organizations. Shami's areas of expertise include, but are not limited to, parent education and training, disability rights law, workforce development, employment, and disability and grant writing. Shami holds a BA degree in anthropology from Nazareth College in Rochester, New York. So without any further delay, I turn the presentation over to Ms. Shami Carr.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Good evening, Virgin Islands. I hope everyone is well today and getting ready for, a continued hunker down, as we say. As we know, with the pandemic, there's really no real end in sight. And so we just appreciate you kind of adjusting to the modality of training. And I'm sure a lot of people are used to Zoom now. So we thank you not only for joining us virtually due to the situation, but also certainly in terms of the topic, serving customers with disabilities. This is honestly one of my favorite trainings. I wish so much I was in person with you guys because it is so much fun. It's so interactive. So please do, feel free to chime in if you've got questions, if you would like to go over a situation, whatever it may be. This training is really about etiquette and it's about somewhat philosophy. So it's going to be a lot more that what we call warm and fuzzies than last week. That was a lot more about the building codes and different kinds of physical access. Today, we're going to be talking about people to people. And we know what small business is. People to people is everything. So I really hope you enjoy this presentation. It'll be a lot of fun. Please do ask questions. And from there, we're going to keep on moving. So So as Mary Jo had mentioned, the Disability Rights Center has collaborated with the Small Business Development Center to bring this series to you. We have partnered in July. That's when we started with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the 30th anniversary. And we've continued on, and we really appreciate the collaboration. Just so you know who we are the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands. We're part of a national network called the Protection and Advocacy Network. And our mission solely is to ensure the just treatment of people with disabilities, and that's all disabilities. We provide advocacy, information and referrals, guidance, legal advocacy, and training. We are an affiliate of the Northeast ADA Center at Cornell University. We are proudly to have been partnering with them for many, many years. And Mary Jo had mentioned in my bio that I also worked at the center. So it's very, very near and dear to my heart, the Northeast ADA Center. I'll talk a little bit more about them at the end in terms of their specific types of trainings and how to leverage their resources. For us, you can reach us if you're in St. Thomas, 340-776-4303. St. Croix, which is our head office, which is 340-772-1200. You can also email us at info@drcvi.org. And I will tell you, during the pandemic, we are not taking walk-in services. We are also working remotely. And if you do have a situation that requires more immediate assistance, I would recommend to give us a call. We're in the office from 9 to 4:30. And if need be, we need to make an appointment. Our advocates will let you know in terms of a walk-in service. But for right now, we are not doing walking. We're not doing drop-in. We're doing appointments only. But please do contact us. We are still working, just like SBDC. Okay. Okay. So as Mary Jo mentioned, this is a 4-part training, and you can see where it's highlighted in orange, serving customers with disabilities. So that's what we're going to focus on today. As I mentioned before, you don't have to take the series sequentially. You can take whatever topic that you are in need of in terms of information. I know a lot of people say, you know, we're good with the building code stuff, we're good with the physical access, but I'm just not that comfortable. We're, serving customers with disabilities. Some people might say, I'm good with that and I'm good with this, but I don't know how to reach out to them. Where are the customers? You might want to join us for our 4th one, which is about inclusive marketing. So again, we appreciate any participation. There's a lot of information in all of these trainings, and in totality, there is so much training that, again, we call this a series because of the fact that you can jump in on the needs of your small business depending on where you're at with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay, in talking about that, I just want to take literally about a minute or two just to talk about the history of the ADA. As I mentioned briefly, that this is more of a philosophy. This is more of a customer service and a people-to-people situation. I know I'm mentioning the law in terms of the ADA, but we really need to also think about how were people perceived with disabilities throughout history. I think a lot of people know the very tragic and the very daunting and the very horrific treatment of people with disabilities. So, the history part is very important because, again, at the end of the day with a small business, you want to welcome everybody to your door. But if you have preconceptions or maybe stereotypes or just fear, that may, really hinder your ability to outreach to people with disabilities as customers. So just a little bit of historical perspective. The ADA is the most comprehensive civil rights law for people with disabilities. We're talking about specifically Title III, which is for places of public accommodations. There are 5 sections to the ADA. We're focusing on the 3rd one in terms of businesses and private and public accommodations. The ADA was amended in 2008 to have further clarified definition of disability, and the ADA Accessibility Guidelines, or ADAG, fondly known, were updated in 2010. So for those folks out there who are interested in also some physical access and building codes and all of that accessible elements, please do join us next week because we're going to be talking a lot about that and including the updates from 2010. People with disabilities are often overlooked because of the market in terms of the net annual disposable income. They have over almost $490 billion of disposable income. We're going to break that down a little bit further into the presentation, but just right off the tops, I don't know if some of you know with marketing that that's 3 times, I believe, as much as the tweens, as they call it. And we know there's tons of marketing for them. So imagine 2 to 3 times more opportunities with this disposable income of people with disabilities. As I mentioned, in terms of how people have perceived people with disabilities, it's so important because we, in America, we are a melting pot. That's the beauty of America, is to be who you are and who you can be in this country. Unfortunately, the views of people with disabilities has not always been that great, even in America, where we're meant to be such a pluralistic society. So as we know in the beginning, a lot of people would say, well, there was the will of God. This was a moral issue about disability. That there was the will of God, that's why you're disabled. And then it got a little bit better in the sense that, maybe it wasn't God who damned you, but we got into the pity, and all of a sudden now, people feel sorry for people. And I bring this specific view up because this is the time when the word handicap came into existence, because people felt sorry for people with disabilities because all they could do was beg on the streets and ask for money. So it was a pity model. And so again, better than the moral, but it still was very degrading. And then we get to the medical model, and we really have to thank the veterans with this, because of the fact that after post-World Wars, they had come back with injuries and amputations and post-traumatic syndrome, and they still wanted to be integrated and, more importantly, perceived as the same person before they left. So the medical model, again, continues to be a better model, but then people with disabilities were like, I'm really not broken. I don't really need to be fixed. I just need access. And so that's where the civil rights movement comes in, of course, off the coattails of the other civil rights activities that were going on, the 64 Act, certainly, in terms of protected classes. It does amaze me that it was 1990 when the ADA was acted, which is quite a bit of time after the 64 Act, but it was signed by the President George H.W. Bush on July 26th. I mentioned that we started to celebrate this with SBDC in July, and I have to just give SBDC the biggest toot, because they have really taken the 30th anniversary into a full fold. As you can see, we have sign language interpreters available. That's part of a universal design. And they have continued to collaborate with us, certainly. And we're actually going to be highlighting a lot of SBDC's ADA implementation in a couple of weeks in our radio show. So more information to come about SBDC. And again, as a disability advocate, I would say they're a great community member as a peer to other organizations who would like to become accessible. So great job, SBDC. All right, with that, today is, this month, I should say, being October, is the National Disability Employment Awareness Month, or finally known as NDEAM. And this is something that's done every year in terms of really supporting people with disabilities. It is out of the Office of Disability Employment Policy, which is under the US Department of Labor. The theme this year is increased access and opportunities. And even though we're talking about serving customers with disabilities, you never know when a situation could be that accommodates both the customer and an employee, such things as parking, accessible bathrooms, things like that. So increased access and opportunities. Again, have to thank the veterans. They started this, as I mentioned before, with the medical model. They started this in 1945. It was a week-long celebration, and then it turned into a month-long celebration, and now we are celebrating the 75th anniversary. Also in October is Disability Mentoring Day. A lot of people are curious about that. Please do let us know if we can provide any information. It's a little bit harder this year with the pandemic because of those opportunities. If you'd like to know more about NDEAM, if you'd like to know more about how to celebrate it, they've got media kits and so forth, you can go on the DOL website. I provided the link below and get more information on this very special month. Okay. So we're going to get right into the presentation. As I mentioned, we're in our second module, which is about customer service. And for small businesses, we know the bottom line is the bottom line. The only color that matters that comes in is the color green, because Everybody wants and hopes that when people come into their business, that someone's going to spend some money. And a lot of times, and I will tell you from my own personal experience, that if I see a restaurant that is not accessible, I will not patron it, because that restaurant tells me that they either don't care about being accessible, or they don't understand that there's a huge market out there if they did become accessible. Again, we're going to talk about the disposable income. And so that's my own personal philosophy. Even though I don't need access, I don't use a wheelchair, I don't patron places that aren't accessible. And so imagine someone like me wanting to visit your store, don't need any access, but then I turn away me and 4 of my friends at your restaurant, and now you've lost not just one person, you've lost 4 people. And that's usually how it works. Customer service is all about word of mouth and reputation. And so this is where it can make or break a situation when it comes to how you service customers, particularly with disabilities, because as we know, it is a little bit different. We know sometimes people look a little different. We know sometimes people act a little different. We know sometimes people communicate a little different. Maybe they have a stuttering issue or a speech issue. Maybe they're coming in and someone's signing. So, people can come in all sorts of ways. Maybe people aren't walking in. Maybe people are wheeling in. Maybe someone's coming in with a service dog. So all of that we're going to talk about today. And the customer service, I think, for a small business is really the meat and potatoes of a small business is customer service. So we're going to talk about making the business case, why it can help you as a business. We're going to definitely talk about proper etiquette and language. And I will tell you that we're going to spend probably a good 45 minutes just talking about different types of disabilities, some background about them, but then also what are some good etiquettes. Again, I go back to what I say about, the only color that matters when it comes through the door. If a person with a disability has this disposable income, you want to make sure you know how to give them good customer service. And we are going to absolutely talk about that. And again, please do jump in if you have questions or you want to run a scenario by. The last thing we'll end on are some staff trainings for in-services. Sometimes a business owner will come and get the information, but kind of just stays there. And, maybe the staff can't join at 6 o'clock at night for a training. I'm going to give you some resources that you could do during a staff meeting that you can do to celebrate July, which is ADA, or October, NDEAM. And definitely in terms of different resources like publications, fact sheets. They even have some posters, I believe. So again, we'll end the training talking about that. And then of course, we're going to talk about some COVID resources, because again, the whole reason why we're in this modality is because of the pandemic. Thank goodness we're all good and safe, but things do look very different. And we want to make sure that you have as much resources as you can related to the situation at hand. Okay, so making the business case. Now I can tell you that many businesses have said, why should I be accessible? What's the benefit? And it's okay to be a business owner and say, what's in it for me? If I can't sustain this business, I don't know if I can take this risk. And so there's a lot of barriers just to convince businesses that it's actually good business sense to market and to obviously have good customer service when it comes to people with disabilities. So we're going to go over 4 factors that makes the business case. We're going to go over disposable income. We're going to go over some statistical information. We're also going to talk about aging and its impact on disabilities. And this is very, very prominent and prevalent with the baby boomers. And again, we'll talk about that. And then we're going to wrap the business case up by talking about tax incentives. I'm sure a lot of businesses may not be aware that there is tax incentives for small businesses. And I believe 91% of the businesses in the Virgin Islands are considered small businesses. So this has very broad applications. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to give you a few examples as well. Okay. So let me ask the first polling question, which is, do you have customers with disabilities regularly frequent your store or / business? And it's either yes, no, or unsure.
For the people on Facebook, you don't see the polling question. So that's all the more reason for you to join us in the full Zoom experience later tonight, or definitely for our next section next week. And we will end the polling in about 5 seconds. Polling is now closing, and I will share the results. 25% of the people say yes, 50% of the people say no, and 25% of the people say that they're not sure.
Well, you know, that is very interesting. And I just thank you so much for participating. And, you know, one of the things that we really want people to know is to just have candor. You know, if you don't know, I'm glad you put you don't know, because a lot of times there's not an obvious disability. Sometimes people might act a little different and you're like, I wonder what's going on. And so, you know, I appreciate everybody's honesty. And that's one thing I want to mention is that, you know, I've talked to so many people in professional situations of businesses, and they are embarrassed. Some people are embarrassed. They said, I didn't know. I feel a little ashamed. Do not feel that way. You know, this is, some people, it's a revolutionary process. They hear the information, they attend a training, kind of the light bulb goes off. Other people, it takes them a little longer. So do not have any shame in that. And I just want to say that as an advocate, because no matter where you start, as long as you start, that's the most important. Okay. So the polls show that about 25% definitely, we know someone with a disability that comes in regularly, but 75% we either know or unsure. And I hope after today, this will give you an opportunity to really think about not only it's a viable customer service base, but we're going to give you, and I hope you will join us on the 4th training when we really talk about how to reach those folks. Where do you market to? As I mentioned, the tween marketing is huge. If we put half the energy that we put in to the tweens, to people with disabilities, it would be mind blowing. So I hope, again, through this presentation that you will see that yes, it's not that hard or difficult or even embarrassing, because some people, you know, they get very nervous and then they, you know, kind of put their foot in their mouth. And we used to do a training at the ADA Center, and it was about sensitivity and awareness. And if you think that you may be at that level to really get a better handle on customer service, please let me know. I will connect you with them, because sometimes you got to start even 2-3 steps back. Okay? And that is no problem. It's just as long as you keep moving forward. Oops. Oh boy. Oh, I'm sorry. I just messed up. Oops. I'm sorry. I pressed something wrong and oh boy. Oops. Okay.
Want to stop sharing?
I just can't find the PowerPoint. I don't know what I pressed. Shoot.
Okay.
Okay, I apologize. I can't find, I'm not sure what screen happened. Should I stop sharing and pull it back up?
Sure.
Okay, I apologize everyone for this. The technical difficulty. Oops, not that. Oh boy. Not that. Oh goodness, I'm so sorry. Okay. Okay.
Okay. You're almost,
Can everybody see it okay?
we see your email.
Boy. Oh boy. Okay. Oh boy.
Okay. Tell me which,
I don't see where I can share the screen. That's what I'm looking for, sharing the screen, because I've got the PowerPoint back up. Okay. boy, I'm so sorry, people. Give me one more.
It should be at the bottom,
Okay.
top of your screen.
Are you able to see the presentation now?
No, I see your email.
Okay. Okay. I close the email. Okay, let me pull up now. Okay, are you able to see the presentation?
Now, click on the presentation.
Okay, and then
Any
you
folders
zoom
that's
share.
open.
Okay. Are you able to see the presentation?
I don't see it.
Okay. Resume share. Okay. Oh, boy. Okay, are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Okay, I am so sorry, people. I really apologize. For us, I know for me, I'm still getting used to the technology, so my sincere apology on that. Okay, so we were talking about the polling question results and how it's important to, you know, kind of come to this with an open mind and open heart, and it's okay in terms of kind of coming to the water. So let's move on to some hard stuff, some hard numbers. And in terms of disposable income and hidden market, now there are more than 61 million Americans in America. And this is per the US CDC as of this year. I frankly think there's more than that because there's some people who don't disclose and there's some that are non-obvious and they're not sure if that actually qualifies. So my guess would be closer to more, maybe 70 million. But for now, it's at 61 million. And as of, seems like an old reference from Department of Justice in 2005, but what it projected is that by 2030, which seemed like eons, which is now only 10 years away, that there will be 71.5 million baby boomers that will be over the age of 65. Now, you might say, we know baby boomers have disposable income. This isn't anything new. But what is different is that a lot of people have not thought about the fact that these baby boomers will be aging, therefore becoming quote unquote more disabled. Now, they are not going to call themselves disabled. They're not going to even perceive themselves as that. They just walk a little slower, or maybe they can't read the menu as well. But more importantly is that they are people with disabilities, because some of these accommodations and customer service is going to benefit them too. So, and again, when we talk about the aging and disability, this is when we're going to talk about the baby boomers again. After tax disposable income for working age people with disabilities is about 490 billion. So I had mentioned, this is probably the third time now in terms of this number, because of the fact of how high it is. You can see it's not too far behind African Americans and also Hispanics. And this was from the American Institute for Research as of last year. So $490 billion. Imagine, you know, I'm thinking about Virgin Islands tourism alone. I mean, I don't want to harp on that too much, but imagine if you could tap into those folks who are coming here, if you were just a little bit more accessible, then that means all of that, you know, money they want to spend. Someone was telling me, I believe, depending on the cruise ships, they know exactly kind of how much money people kind of bring to spend when they come for the excursion. They also said that the majority of people who have disabilities and wheelchairs stay on the cruise ship. So imagine if that was something that could be opened up. And again, we're hoping through this series, not only will you see the monetary value, I know the cruise ships aren't in right now, but I do know there's some tourists there, but fingers crossed that the season, you know, gets up and running for next year. This is a great time to start putting some of this ADA stuff in place. So because when they start coming, again, your place is going to be accessible. And again, when we talk about marketing, we'll show you how to make sure that those people with disabilities know exactly know that you are accessible. Discretionary income for working age people with disabilities is about 21 billion, which is greater than that of African-American Hispanic markets segments combined. Again, that's the American Institute for Research. So we're not talking about millions, we're talking about billions of dollars. So I hope, if nothing else, you see there is a large customer base that is just overlooked. It is the hidden market, and it's something that if you figure out how to access it, do remember that most people don't travel by themselves. Most people do not eat out by themselves. Most people do not go shopping by themselves, unless it's groceries, of course. But the point is, they're not coming by themselves. Just a quick example I'd like to illustrate is that I was on a project with 20 other people in New York. This was about 5 years ago, and we were having a state meeting. And so, of course, me, the ADA queen, I told them, I'm going to find a good restaurant for us. Well, I did all my research, and it turned out that there was literally only one restaurant. Now, imagine there's, out of 20 of us, only 2 people. One used crutches, one used a wheelchair. And imagine for 2 people for accommodation, they lost hundreds upon hundreds of dollars because the 18 of us were not going to go where these 2 were not welcome. So that just gives you an illustration of if you become accessible, it's not just 1 or 2. In this example, there was 20 of us who went out to dinner, and that, you know, that makes a big difference when it comes to people with disabilities, because we would have never gone if they were not accessible. So it is it kind of proof in the pudding about that. Okay. All right, so let's get to some statistical and demographic information. There's 330, and I meant to put more like 339, but there's over 330 million people in America. Out of the 330 plus million people in America, 60 plus million are people with disabilities. Out of the 60 million people with disabilities, 15 million, I'm going to skip down actually 2 arrows, 15 plus million are people who are working. So imagine that. And then, but the population without disabilities is 155 million. And then sadly, people with disabilities is nearly 20% unemployment rate. And when the pandemic started, and it was really crushing in April, it was a sad statistic, but the unemployment rate was pretty much close to that of people with disabilities. So, you know, we would be very shocked if that was maintained for people without disabilities. We should be also appalled that that's the rate for people with disabilities. Again, we're not going to be talking about employment, but it is something to definitely raise your eyebrow about. Okay. Now, I want to mention another part of the Disability Institute on Disability Employment at Cornell University. The ADA Center is just one of many projects there. Another project they have is the disabilitystatistics.org. And just for the sake of technology, we're not going to go on any websites, but I will let you know that link right there will take you straight to the Virgin Islands Disability Status Report. These are done in conjunction with the American Community Survey as well as the US Census. It's very heavy, obviously research and data driven, but they lay it out very nice and easy to read. And I believe the Virgin Islands is a nice booklet like the ones I'm showing you. So you can download that. You can look at, I believe it's every state and every territory. I'm not sure about maybe the South Pacific. I certainly have Puerto Rico. So check that link out. It'll give you a lot of great information. It'll break it right down for you for the Virgin Islands. Maybe you just want to see some hard data. This is a great place to get that. Okay. So now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about prevalence rate of people with disabilities regarding age. And when we used to do this with Cornell, there was a little bit of different visual, and it really gave you, again, a visual of how this works. If you see 10 people and they're age 15 to 25, you're going to see about 1.5 of them having a disability. And so we think, okay, you know, 10%. Younger people. Again, if this age group has disability, they're usually considered people with developmental disabilities. That's from disabilities from birth to the age of 22. So, you know, 10.5%. We go up a little bit to age 25 to 44. You can see it really doesn't change much. I mean, we're talking literally 0.6%. It's not a huge jump at all. But now when we start to look at middle-aged people, age 45 to 54, we saw that it went from 11.1 to 19.4. And that's a very significant jump, almost as significant as the age bracket of 54 to 64, which is 28.1. Again, if we had a visual, we would see if there's 10 people, almost a third would have a disability. And if you think about your customer base, a third is a very large chunk. I think a little 1, 2, 3% may not add up to much, but I clearly know that any kind of return on investment, if you get a 30%, that is very high. So keep that in mind that, and again, this is where we start to talk about the baby boomers. This is when we start to talk about, okay, these are the people with disposable income. They have no interest in slowing down. They want to continue to travel, which is awesome because it's great for tourist place. But again, they're not going to call themselves disabled, but they do have functional limitations. And so if you provide that universal design to your place, to your business, it really doesn't matter who walks in your door or rolls in your door, because the fact is it's going to be accessible and welcoming. So when we continue to look at the prevalence rate between 65 to 69, and again, we're only talking a 4-year span difference, it went up quite significantly, almost 10% right there, just in that 4-year bracket. And then we know pretty much full retirement, 70 and on, we're looking at nearly half of the population. Again, these are the baby boomers who are traveling, who are coming to Virgin Islands. And again, you can see the numbers don't lie. When you age, you become more disabled. And when you become more disabled and you have disposable income, you still want to spend money. And so that's where we come in to say, let us show you how to become accessible, because again, you don't know who's coming through your door. Okay. Now, talking about coming through your door, the Department of Justice has set up a tax incentive package. And again, for the sake of technology, we're not going to actually go on that package, but the link is right there. Now, one of the things is people say, well, I'm a small business. I don't have an accounting arm. I contract out with someone. I certainly don't have an accounting department. So what we let people know is that, well, there are people who can help you to fill this out, because small businesses, because they are limited, they may not have not only the capacity, but they may not have the time. And so one project I was on, which I love because we actually were the accounting arm for small businesses. My colleague actually did the tax incentives for businesses. And so that was just incredible, because of the fact is we didn't want anything to stop small businesses if they wanted to become accessible, even if we had to be part of that solution. It was great. So what can these tax incentives be used for? Can be used for removing physical barriers, facilities and vehicles. Let's say you're a small hotel, a small boutique hotel, but you do have a vehicle. You want to make sure that that service is for the guests, then that's got to be service for guests who have disabilities. Effective communication, including interpreters, accessible websites, alternate formats, and then you can always purchase some accessible equipment and consultation. Now, the interesting thing with consultation, it is situational. So let's say that you decide, I think I'm going to try this. I think I'm going to try this ADA stuff. And, I don't even know where to start. Let me call Shami, because she was the one presenting, and she's going to get me to where I got to go. Then I get you to where you got to go. And all of a sudden you realize that there's so much free and accessible and cost saving services and supports when it comes to disability. So, excuse me. So one of the options for you in terms of the DOJ tax incentive is to be able to then use it at a time when, no matter where you are with ADA, if you need to use a consultant, that is an option. Again, I can start you off with some free consultation, and you might be surprised you might not need any, but do know that they even include that, because sometimes people just don't know where to start. Okay. I'm going to give you some examples. And I really apologize. I'm just getting over a cold. So the examples I want to give you now, this is all gross estimates. This is just for illustration purpose. This does follow the formula for the tax incentives, but I know with accounting, it gets a little bit deeper. So let's just look at this as kind of surface value. So let's say that you want to do a ramp that's going to cost $2,000. You get a tax credit, the first half, which is of course $1,000, and then you get to deduct $1,000. And it's pretty much that simple formula all the way through. Let's say you want to do an accessible bathroom. It's going to cost $10,000. Tax credit's $5,000. Your tax deduction is $5,000. Let's say you want to use a sign language interpreter for a grand opening, like we're kind of doing with the training. We're making it universally designed. If you're going to have a grand opening or you want to do a big splash, include having an interpreter. You never know who might be coming. And advertise it too. Again, we're not talking about marketing today, but that's something you'd want to advertise. I know me personally, if I see a grand opening and I see an interpreter, I'm going to check it out because I'm going to be very impressed. So let's say that costs $500. Again, half of it's a tax credit. The other half is tax deduction. Now, we had spoken a little bit about accessible chairs and tables at an eatery. So, it may be that you only need maybe 3 or 4 sets of tables that are lower and not the high top. So I kind of made it at a little higher rate, $5,000. Again, $2,500 tax credit, $2,500 tax deduction. And then a lula. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of a lula. A lula is called limited use, limited application elevator. And it's basically meant for a 1-story penetration. So if anybody's been to Greenhouse, they have a lula. It's been out of commission for a little bit, but that is what a lula looks like, where they're going to start on the 2nd floor and bring it down to the 1st floor. So those are just some examples. And what I want to ask in the next polling question is just based on this conversation. And I know it's brief, but can you see yourself using any of these? Can you see your business using any of these tax incentives? Yes, no, unsure.
Again, you people on Facebook, you cannot participate in a poll, but you could probably leave a message and we'll get that and say what you said, whether you think yes, you can or no, you can't. But we're going to end the poll now based on the tax incentives and breaks. Can you see your business using them? And I'm ending the poll now. And 50% of the people said yes, 25% of the people said they're not sure, and 25% of the people said no.
Okay. So I think it's great that, more than half definitely, and if we take unsure, we might even say 75% could see that. This was just to be an opening, an entry, kind of a cursory opportunity just to see this information. You certainly would be an expert, but if you think it absolutely tickles your interest, then please do talk to us, because we can at least give you the initial information, and then we can definitely get you to some folks who can help you with the more nitty-gritty stuff. But just know, just because it's a territory does not mean that you don't have access to these tax incentives and breaks. Okay. All right, so let's get into kind of the heart of the training, which is how to serve customers with disabilities. Okay. And we're basically going to go, we're going to talk about language, and then we're going to go through different types of disability. So the first thing we always want to talk about is person first language. There's nothing more insulting or derogatory than using some of these names. I mentioned the one handicap because of the, we talked about the pity model and how that was used because the hand was in cap to beg. Of course, that is not well liked by people with disabilities. It's considered a taboo. Sadly, a lot of people, even design professionals and some building code people, just because the word handicap is in there, that word is still used. So you see handicap parking, you see handicap bathroom. Eventually that'll go away. But as you're speaking to someone or referring to someone, do not use the word handicap. It's just as bad as the word cripple. And I always tell people there's certain words in certain populations or groups that you just don't say. Like if you're a white person, you don't say the N word. And the same thing is true. You don't use the word, we call it the C word, the cripple. So you don't want to say the C word because that's just as bad as the N word. And language means something. And we certainly know that because of what we've seen, with history. Words like retarded. Now people, it's fair to say people don't really know that's changed too much, but it has. People who are retarded, it's just been so derogatory. It's been just so degrading. And I really feel bad for children because it sometimes starts there. So, and again, I'm going to give you the right word for that because, people have what they call intellectual disability. So there's a proper word to use. Mental, it's not the kindest word. Mental health is different now, but mental alone is not nice. Insane, of course, is not welcomed. But special. And some people say, well, why special? Because like it is special ed. But people with disabilities do not want to be seen as special because it makes them stand out. And so that's kind of like when people talk about brave. Why do I always have to be the Superman or Superwoman? I'm like anybody else. I've got good and bad and in between. So those words seem a little bit euphemistic, but it is derogatory. One of my favorite, of course, is wheelchair bound. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the cartoon where there is a person in a wheelchair and he's wrapped up like a mummy, wheelchair bound. It's a little comical, but it's not welcome. Of course, electric chair. Nobody wants to be referred to as, oh, that person in the electric chair. Just not a good visual, to say the least. Abnormal. I have a personal problem with abnormal because we still have in our colleges abnormal psychology, and I don't think that's right. So abnormal is not welcomed. Mentally ill. Now people say, well, they are ill. I mean, that's better than saying insane and crazy and mental. But mentally ill goes back to what we talked about with the medical model. Like they're sick, they're broken, got to fix them. People don't want to be referred to that. Mental health is what the proper language to use. And challenged and slow and all that. So again, these are derogatory words. Now that you see them and know that, I bet that when you guys look at some marketing or look at something you read, you're going to find a couple of these words and be like, yep, they're still using them. I tell you, the media is not our friend at times because they're one of the worst who continues to use some of this language. So, we need to be better about that. So those are derogatory words. Most important, you always refer to the person first, not the disability. They're not going to say, oh, Shami. Well, they might say the Indian one, but they would say more, oh, Shami the advocate, or they might find a different way to describe me than just that. Just like disability, they want to be described as disability first. See me as the person first. So examples are person with a disability, a person with an intellectual disability, and that is what's taken over things like slow, challenge, retarded. Person who uses a wheelchair or a power chair, again, replacing wheelchair bound, electric chair, a person who has AIDS, person who has diabetes, person who has cancer, person who has whatever, but the person is first. And then a person with a mental health disability. These are examples of how to talk to someone, just basic communication to make sure you really don't offend people. Sometimes people don't even know they're offending people, then they feel bad. So again, we're just trying to help you come to the water. And some of this etiquette, just like language, some simple stuff really, really makes a difference because I just think that so many times people have very bad misperceptions or stereotypes, and they continue to use some of the language that just continues to, not put people with disabilities in the best light. So language first. Okay. Now we're going to get into the disabilities. Now, many of you might say, well, you've been in the field long, you must know all the disabilities. I do not know all disabilities. I know a lot, but I don't know all. And I don't claim to, because I could have a disability and someone else could have the same disability. It doesn't mean it impacts us the same. So always keep that in mind. Just because one person has Alzheimer's doesn't mean it necessarily impacts them exactly the same. Epilepsy, cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injury, or known as TBI, and stroke. These are all neurological disabilities, and they always have some sort of physical effect. Sometimes it affects behavior and emotion, but not always. Cerebral palsy does not always affect behavior and emotion. And cognitive capacity, such as memory, again, maybe Alzheimer's, maybe traumatic brain injury or stroke, but again, cerebral palsy may not. TBI may or may not. So again, it may affect it, it may not. And the course and effects of the injury are unique to the individual. I've worked with many people with TBI, and I've yet to ever see someone who had very similar nuances. So again, I think that's the most important thing. Sometimes when we talk about different groups, we say, well, they're kind of all alike, or they kind of all act the same. Disability is just like any other group. Nope. You may even have the same disability, but have absolutely different manifestations of that disability. So the etiquette for someone's got a neurological disability is treat adults like adults. We also see this with Down syndrome, treat adults like adults. I'm sure some of you out there who have maybe some aging parents, you still want them to be treated like adult, not a child. And don't confuse these disabilities with developmental disabilities. Again, we were just talking about intellectual disabilities, people maybe being challenged or slower and all that. That's that, okay? But again, when we talk about developmental, it's not always about intellectual. It could be other things that also affect, but don't confuse them with them. Don't make assumptions. So for example, most people with neurological disorders do not experience cognitive impairment. So don't assume because they might have had a stroke or they have cerebral palsy and they walk with a different kind of gait that they're impaired with their cognition, okay? People with neurological disorders experience problems with gait. They are not drunk. And I wanted to share this quick story because, as you know, I've been in the field over 20 years, but when I went to college, there was this a guy, and you know, at college you have a lot of fun and go to parties. Well, he was always kind of walking a little different, and I was I was so glad to know that, oh, he's a great artist and he's got gait issues and he's got cerebral palsy and he's an artist. It was amazing to learn about him, but most people thought he was drunk at the time. So, you know, it can happen to the best of us, but it really does. I can't tell you how many times people with CP have told me that people thought they were drunk, and then it gets to be an implication when they're driving, because then if a police pulls them over, then it's real problems. So do not assume they are drunk whatsoever. It's just how they walk. Offer help, but use your common sense. I had a colleague who used crutches, and he said, "Don't help me," because it was like really icy. He said, "Don't help me because I'll fall." And I almost went to help him and he almost fell. And so, you know, when they tell you don't help, use common sense. Even I've been a victim of that, you know, when you want to help so much. So, and when in doubt, it's okay to ask. People would much rather you ask, "Can I help you? Do you need any help? Are you okay?" They'll let you know. They 100% let you know. Okay? That's very respectful to do that. Now, wheelchair users. I know the statistics looks a little old. In 2002, there were 2.7 million wheelchair users, but I actually checked up on that a couple of days ago, and it is still 2.7 million. So not sure, you know, the census throws some of it off. Again, this is dated from 2002. We're going to have some new data coming out with the census for 2020, and I'm sure that's unfortunately probably be increased. In 2008, that number increased to 3.6 million, and then 60% of wheelchair users are over the age of 65. Now, spinal cord injury, it affects part of the body below the injury of the spinal cord. So, and it may not just be an injury. You know, a lot of people who use wheelchairs, they get asked a lot, what happened? What happened? Sometimes it's an accident or an injury. Sometimes it's a medical condition. So, you know, it depends how close you are to that person, but you know, I think the most thing as a customer to be respectful. People certainly don't want to be talking about their personal medical issues, like why are you using a wheelchair? And I just have to give a shout out to the person in the picture because that's my friend. I used to work with her, and she was one of the two people I mentioned about the restaurant. We were going nowhere if Chelsea was not going with us. And she is just an amazing human being and just another great advocate. So had to big her up. And then when it comes to etiquette, now when I worked at Cornell, my boss used a wheelchair. And so she'd always joke with us. She's like, "You ready to go to lunch?" And sometimes she would say, "You ready to roll to lunch?" So, you know, we used to just be lighthearted about it. But the thing is that when you're around someone who uses a wheelchair, you do want to be mindful. First of all, people walk at different paces. Walk slowly. You know, match that person's pace. Now, I personally know some people who use wheelchairs who are breaking the speed limit. Okay, they are just going so fast. So you know, maybe it's uncommon, but you know, again, match the pace to the person. Treat the wheelchair or walker as an extension of the person's body. Never touch or push on a mobility aid without the person's permission. There is nothing more condescending and annoying. And again, I'm speaking all from people with disabilities I've spoken to, who says they come and they put their arm right around the chair like it's a chair, like a regular chair. This is not a chair. This is an extension of who I am. So another thing, if you just walk away with 2-3 things tonight, one thing is to, you know, really be respectful of someone's chair. It's kind of like a service dog. We'll talk about that. You don't touch that either. These are extensions of who people are. If possible, sit down or kneel to be eye level. That's one of the first thing. I mean, if I know someone is using a wheelchair, the first thing I'm going to do is pull up a chair. I personally don't like to kneel because I think we do that with children, and I just don't think that, you know, for adults it just seems as good. So I always pull up a chair, and if you don't have a chair, that's fine, but do try to find one. Then you can have a real conversation. Nothing worse than having a conversation, and especially if you're trying to sell something or you know, show someone. Now, you may not have a chair right in the store. Maybe that's not convenient, but definitely do your very best to be eye level, just so that you can have that conversation. Because, you know, we speak with our mouth and we also speak with our eyes. Okay? And then offering help. It's usually okay to pick up something that's dropped. Let me grab that for you. You want me to grab that for you? That's okay. But again, when in doubt, a quick and polite check-in is fine. I know that some people who go through doors, they have their own way they do it. And if you try to help, that interferes their flow. So just a quick polite check-in always in terms of any kind of assistance. When we talk about speech disabilities. Now, I have to be honest, in the field of disability, this is one of the more difficult ones. You have someone who might be coming in who you may not understand what they're saying. They might be stuttering. It just might be very difficult. And you can understand why someone might feel uncomfortable. There are a lot of people who have difficulty speaking, as you can see, you know, almost probably 3 million at this point have some sort of speech difficulty. I've got a friend who stutters. And, you know, I'm patient, so it's nothing to me, but I know that some people are not nice to him because of that. It can arise from a number of different causes. One thing to keep in mind with disabilities is that there's always different causes. So you never know what could have caused a speech disability, everything from an accident to maybe a medical situation, a disease, trauma. You just never know, okay? And don't confuse a speech disability with a cognitive intellectual disability. I cannot tell you how many times people say, oh boy, they sound kind of dumb. I really don't know what they're saying. It's kind of the same terrible etiquette that we see people who have second language issues. Oh, they're speaking that broken language. They really don't know proper English. So, you know, I know how that feels, I think, for that group as well. And I always see some sort of analogy because they're not getting a fair shake in terms of communication. So another example of don't confuse a speech disability with cognitive. I had a colleague and she had a very significant gait and she was pretty speech impaired. She also had masters and she was a keynote speaker. So, you know, she absolutely had no cognitive intellectual disabilities, but sometimes when you see on the surface, it's that saying, right? Don't judge a book by its cover. Speech disabilities, no different, okay? And speech disabilities can sometimes be accompanied, by facial, muscle, and or vocal inflection. So, it may not just be the speech. It maybe if they've had a stroke, it could affect them a little bit with that. So just keep that in mind in terms of different ways that people communicate. And we know, you know, this is number one in terms of, you know, verbal speech, but some people do struggle with it. But I can tell you again, you don't know that person might be coming in with a lot of money, but if you can't understand them and you brush them off, you might have just lost a really valuable customer. And so again, never judge a book by its cover. You just never know who's got what in their pocket when it comes to money. Okay, so speech disability etiquette. And this is, again, when you're in a small business and when it's busy, you know, a lot of times it's hard to like, okay, what was I supposed to do? You know, this is stuff that you can start to kind of get a little bit acquainted with because hopefully, fingers crossed, there's a good high season in the winter that you're going to get people with different communication. Again, some of the stuff you might want to think about now because when it happens, you'll be ready and you'll be very comfortable with it. So first thing, definitely with speech disabilities, is to not jump in and finish sentences. Let the person speak. Again, I've been in numerous situations where it's just a matter of patience. Now you might say, well, that's all good and dandy, but I got a shop, I got a business to run. I've got people in line. People are getting upset. You know what? That person's a paying customer too. And so they have every right to be there and have every right to be, cashing out. I just have to be patient. Now, sometimes I recommend if it gets a little bit too difficult, you can use pen and paper. Sometimes, and that's one of the bottom bullets. It's okay to ask the person to repeat themselves or even write it down. That's okay. What they don't like is assuming you know what they said, which you don't, or kind of just continue the conversation like they got and they kept going. There's nothing more disrespectful. And definitely, if we're talking about a small business and you want to be able to understand the person so that you can make that sale, you want to be able to make sure you've got some tools in your pocket. That includes good etiquette, and that include maybe at the registers you have a pen and paper there. Maybe that's one of your new practices. Have a pen and paper. You never know when someone might have a speech disability. Again, these are things that you can start to ramp up and get prepared for when business does get jumping again. Another thing we talk about all the time is always face the person and hold eye contact. Again, I always say you speak with your mouth and you speak with your eyes. One of the things is that some people think you should talk louder. Well, they're not deaf. They're not deaf, so that's not going to help them. Or slower. And people with speech disabilities have told me that when people talk slower, it distorts their communication. So just talk natural. Someone like myself, I'm a very fast talker, but I have to control my pace too. If it's a person with a disability, sometimes I have to because of a different communication, but sometimes it's not related to disability at all. Sometimes you have to do a training. You can't talk like a machine gun. And so, this is something that we all practice, I think, when it comes to communication, to have the best communication. You can imagine how it gets a little bit more difficult when you have a speech disability, when people are already making judgments. People may not even want you in their store. I can't imagine anybody online would do that. But they may just really get the harsh treatment and never make it to your business because they never ever felt welcomed. Everybody has to make adjustments, and everybody has to be patient. Again, sometimes it's not even disability related. This is one of the biggest ones. Don't ignore someone with a speech disability because you're afraid you won't understand them. Again, this goes back to what I was talking about, oh, I'm too nervous, or I'm afraid I'm going to mess up, or, I'm too shamed, like I'll look stupid. It's okay. People with disabilities much rather you say, listen, I'm not used to this, but I'm here. So tell me what's good for you, or tell me how I can help. And so again, don't ignore that person just because you don't understand them. Again, I'm hoping through trainings like this. And again, if you need some more higher level disability and sensitivity awareness training, please do let us know. There's also some that, again, you can do with your staff, and it can really give you some more simulations and experiences with that. So, it's because this is exactly what happens. People ignore people if they see a person they're not comfortable with. Okay. Now, mental health. Now, mental health, in my opinion, has gotten one of the worst raps ever. One thing I wish that people would start is talking about language is mental health disabilities. So what does that mean? What falls under mental health? Most people know depression. I believe that I had read that depression was the #1 disability in the world, which is really depressing. But things, depression, anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. There's all sorts of different post-traumatic certainly is included. I did not list all of them. But it says approximately 5 to 10% of the US population has a mental health disability. And, frankly, as a business owner, you're not going to be able to usually 99% of the time, you're not going to know that someone has a mental health disability. Okay. There is so much stereotypes and misnomers and false, perceptions of people with mental health, like they're going to go crazy and they're going to kill everybody and they're going to go postal. And statistics have shown they're the fewest who do that. People without mental health is a much higher rate. So, but again, 5 to 10% of the population. And about, I'd say 25% of them have very severe persistent mental health. I personally had a very, very, very close friend who had bipolar, and I got to see firsthand experience what that really is about. And so, these are disabilities that are very persistent. They need management, they need medication at times. I'm not a big medication person, but I do think sometimes people need it for chemical balance. I know my friend did. And I can tell you that it was hard to go with him to stores. He might kind of get upset, or if someone, didn't quite take him the right way. So, it is something that people with people with mental health disabilities, perception is a big thing for them. So what do they want? They want to be treated like anyone else. In a minute, we'll talk about that etiquette. But myths are very, very prominent, or unfortunately almost dominates mental health disabilities. It's not reasonable. Most mental health disabilities are treatable. Medications are getting better every day. And again, I mentioned I'm not a big pill person, but I can tell you there's other types of treatable-ness, like art therapy, music therapy. I mean, there's just so much right now. It's so creative. And so that's just a great thing, I think, when we come to, treatment for people with mental health. It's not always just about medication. It's a result of poor character or weak personality. Again, a lot of times there's so much shame in mental health. We know Caribbean, we know sometimes the Black community, sometimes, I'm Indian, we have issues too, that we not only do we not talk about it, we hide it. We hide that person. And it becomes a very much, a very, very difficult way to, if you never see people with mental health and they get shunned, then, here we go, kind of going back 50, 60, 70 years. And again, we know mental health is definitely one of those that gets a bad rap. People are seen as weak or character. I want to use an example, but it's not necessarily mental health, but it has some impact with it. Back in, I believe, the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of children who were being born who just weren't really getting the warm and fuzzies. They just were having, coming out very different. And a lot of people said maybe that's when autism started. People really kind of getting, an understanding of what this looks like. Well, they used to call the moms refrigerator moms. And so you can imagine how that was perceived. Like, that's a very cold person. That's a weak person. That's poor character. That's someone who doesn't engage with their children. And I'm sure a lot of mothers were very not happy with that. But it's the same thing that when a label gets stuck to someone, how not only does it affect them, but then in terms of the interaction. So, mental health, again, it is a brain disorder. It is not a fault. It is not a flaw. It is not a weakness, and it is not a poor character. And for those who have post-traumatic stress syndrome, I feel for them the most, because they've gone through so much trauma, and this is the residual effect of having a mental health disabilities. And so for anybody to ever be so, vagrant in perceiving them as weak, they've been through so much. So that's just my little support to the PTS group. People with disabilities are far more likely to be violent. We know this is not the truth. This is a myth. People with disabilities are far, for the most part, equally, if not less, to be violent. Okay, and my research has shown a little bit less to be violent than people without mental health. So, mental health disabilities, it's a big one. It's a big one. So, some etiquette. Again, don't confuse mental health disabilities with mental retardation. People used to use them interchangeably. That is not what it is. There are a lot of people with mental health disabilities who have very high IQ. So again, don't confuse the two. People with mental health disabilities are rarely violent. We've been talking about that. Don't assume that people with mental health disabilities can't make decisions or handle any stress. Okay, so you're the person's at the store and they're maybe they're the ones waiting in line and their patience is getting a little low because of their own issues. But that doesn't mean that they're always going to be disruptive or loud. Everybody's got their own coping skills. But people with mental health can handle stress. They just have different coping skills. And again, I think when we're talking about people as customers, you're really not going to see too much of this visually, because mental health is typically a non-obvious disability. But if it ever comes up, at least you've got a little bit of etiquette to know it doesn't affect them in terms of intellect. It's rarely that they're violent, and they can certainly make decisions. So if they're at your store and they want to buy this or that, they don't need somebody to tell them. They've got the intellect. So, okay. Mary Jo, was there a comment or a question?
Not yet.
Okay, I just thought I heard something. Okay, sounds good. We'll keep going. So we'll talk about visual disabilities. Now, visual disabilities is kind of a mixed bag, just like hearing disabilities. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. You can be completely blind, or you can just be partially blind. You can be blind in one eye. You can have all sorts of different kind of conditions that affect your vision. So it's really all over the place when it comes to visual disabilities. Again, around 2 million people have a severe visual impairment or blindness. So we're talking about those folks are probably not driving. Those folks, so which means that they may be coming with someone to your store. So another customer. Certainly people with disabilities can take the safari. People with disabilities take buses by themselves who are blind. But in terms of that kind of the people who are blind, it's not a huge number. What the much bigger number is people with the visual impairments. And again, those some examples I gave with, and that includes also colorblind too. Okay. And again, as I just mentioned, there's varying levels of visual disability. They might use a cane, they might use a dog, they might use a person. Maybe they have a personal care person that they use. So different levels of disability based on, how they're affected by their vision. Again, we mentioned some people use service animals, and not all people with disabilities read Braille. I can tell you that as a business, I think confidently I can say I would never put anything in Braille unless requested, which I can't see that coming up. I say that because far and fewer people are reading Braille. Now I know I've worked with some children with disabilities. They are actually being taught Braille, which I was surprised. With the new technology, what they call screen readers, you can be completely blind to just nominal visual disability. They've got software to really address a lot of that. So Braille, you're really not going to see. And I'm going to tell you right now, I would never invest in a Braille machine. I wouldn't really worry about Braille too much because it's just not as prominent as it used to be, which was, of course, the main mode of reading back in the days. As I mentioned, many new developments in IT. And let's talk about that for a second before we go to the next bullet. Now, I don't know if we could do a raise of hand, but do all businesses that are on, do you all have a website? And if someone could just let me know, because I can't see the chat box, if anybody's raised their hands. If businesses have websites.
Looks like no one's raising their hands.
Oh, okay. Well, if you did have a website, you'd have to keep in mind that website also needs to be accessible. I was mentioning to you with the tax credit that, let's say, I wouldn't even know where to start with this website. And that's fine, because as a small business owner, you're not an IT specialist unless you have an IT business. So the good thing is that, as I mentioned with the tax stuff, is you could hire a consultant who knows how to make a website accessible. Because recently there was a Supreme Court ruling with Domino's for a person who was blind, and they were sued, and the person with disability won. So a lot of times we talk about physical access, but e-commerce is also part of access for a business. And it's already been determined by Department of Justice, whether it's been through new regulations or settlement agreements or whatever kind of activity that was around a complaint. I can tell you that they include now certainly IT in the e-commerce world as part of Title III, which is places of public accommodations. So if you do not have a website, or if you have a website, especially that does payments, PayPal, any kind of vendoring, please let us know. We know we can get you to the folks who know how to make those accessible. Because as I mentioned to you, a lot of people with disabilities shop online. A lot. I wish I had some of that data, maybe for the marketing. I'll make sure to have that. And because the reality is that everybody's surfing the web. Everybody is purchasing things online. And so it only behooves you to have an accessible website. And let's face it, during the pandemic, just like we're modifying our trainings, you're probably modifying also your protocols for your business. And a lot of that has to do with switching over to web access and e-commerce. So please, if you have a website, again, this is another opportunity for you to become accessible. And you may not even know how many people will go through your electronic door in terms of being customers, okay? And so we'll talk about a little bit of the physical. How
Hold up for a second, Shami.
Yep.
Mr. Knight says that he has a website for his business.
Okay. And Mr. Knight, is it accessible?
Is that yes in the comments meant for that?
Wonderful. Wonderful, Mr. Knight. Well, good. And, this is where businesses can talk to each other and say, this is how I did it. And, I always tell people as an advocate, you can pound the table all day, but if you have another business who's done it, they will be more valuable to another business. So Mr. Knight, thank you for sharing that. And I mean, I would encourage anybody who, would like to know how it's done as a business perspective. But again, as in terms of a service, that is something that certainly we can help you get connected to 100%. Okay. So how accessible is your business to people with visual disabilities? Protruding objects in line of movement and protruding objects from the wall. Now, it sounds a little, getting into technicalities. Again, we're not getting into that. That's next weekend when we talk about protruding objects. How far can they be in the line of movement? How tall? How much protruding? What's the level of clearance? That's all next week's training. But most important, just think about your business. And I mean, if possible, you could put a blindfold on and see how easy or hard it is to navigate your business. Now, a lot of people are blind, again, they have a service dog or some sort of aid. It would be interesting to see, because if you find out you're walking, you hit your head, then that is not a good clearance for someone. If you have something that's protruding, maybe it's some sort of shelf or a merchandise shelf or something. These are things to keep in mind. Again, we'll go over that next week, but it's all about making sure that not only are people safe, but you want them to be paying customers and you don't want them to get hurt at your place. So, okay. And just some etiquettes when it comes to visual disabilities. First and foremost, you must allow a service animal into places of business. This has been settled many, many, many times. This is written and unwritten law. I mean, the whole thing is a sealed deal. Some businesses say, well, I have a restaurant, so I'm not letting them in because there's food. No. You do need to let them in if that is truly a service animal, even in that situation. Department of Justice has put out a brief to talk about places that are excluded for service animals, and they're very specific. It's nothing related to places of public accommodations. We're talking literally places like certain parts of the hospital, certain parts of the kitchen. You're probably not going to have a service animal back in the dishwashing room. So there are certain places they can't go, but as a commerce, as a transactional place, as a customer coming through your door, service animals do need to be allowed to come to your place of business. When someone has a service animal, everybody is guilty of this. They are so beautiful. They are so lovey. I mean, they're just such gorgeous animals so many times. And you want to pet them. And you just want to pet them. But it is working. And it's a working service animal. So you don't ever touch a working service animal. Sometimes they have jackets on, sometimes they don't. But if they're with a person with a disability, they are working at that point, okay? We're going to talk a little bit more about that towards the end with service animals. I'm sure many of you have seen the sign that says service animals welcome. You can put that simply on your business and that covers everything. Service animals welcome. You don't have to put anything else. You don't have to get into citations. You don't have to get into the ADA law. You don't have to do any of that. Just put service animal, welcome. Give the person conversational cues. So let's say the person's coming into your business and they had asked for a specialty item. Oh, I would be happy to show it to you. Come on over. If you want, you can grab my arm or whatever works, but let me show you exactly where it is. And I'm even going to go with you. You know, gently tap the person on the shoulder, not only when you begin a conversation, but also when you're starting to move. I can tell you that sadly, so many times people with visual disabilities have been left standing talking to themselves. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing when it happens to anybody. So, you know, always say goodbye when you're leaving. If, you know, you're at a business and, you know, most people have good manners to say, well, have a good night and stuff. This isn't usually a problem in businesses, but just some etiquette in terms of the conversation cues, okay? Give the person a brief description of their surrounding. There's a table about 2 feet in front of you. The door is about 5 feet away on your left. And again, if you're going through a business, I'm thinking of the shops down, and I'm so sorry that I'm talking more about St. Thomas and St. Croix. It's just because I lived in St. Thomas. But, you know, if you're going on the boardwalk of Christiansted, say, or downtown, you know, the main, you know, back street or the main street of downtown, there's a lot of stores. And so, again, when someone's navigating the specialty store or a you know, place that's pretty crowded, you do want to be able to let people know, okay, this is what the surroundings are. Again, if someone's coming to your business, regardless of disability, they have an interest in your merchandise, even if it's just window shopping like a tourist. You never know. So sometimes they have those barkers out there. If they see someone with a visual disability, hey, jump on the etiquette. You never know. You can get them right into your store. You know, just explain what's going on. Again, you just don't ever know who has what in their pocket. And I will say that on a personal note, because I know that some people think certain race may not have certain money, and then they come and they're like, wow. I've seen that also with other populations, young people. I've seen it with older people. So there's certain times we are stereotyped and categorically put. So I'm going to say that to anybody is you never know who's coming through your door with what's in their pocket. They may have so much money. You said something disrespectful. You used a word that wasn't properly proper etiquette. You've just turned them off. You don't know. They might have wanted to come and spend $1,000 in your store. You just don't know. And I'm sure that's one of the golden rules of customer service is never judge a book by its cover. Okay. And again, if the person would like assistance, you offer your elbow. Again, this is where I wish that I was in person with you guys. It makes it a little bit more interactive. You know, I could do a little show and tell. You know, don't push the person and don't walk too quickly. And don't clutch a person's arm like you try to steer them. I've walked with many people who have visual disabilities or blind, and it's just a matter of the elbow. And it becomes pretty natural. Again, I think that when we're talking about businesses and we're talking about places that are people going into, many times people will have some sort of aid with them, but that doesn't mean as a business owner or, you know, someone working in the business to, excuse me, to make sure that they do know these etiquettes, because, you know, they expect you to be comfortable. And so again, this is what this training is for. You may need it, you may not need it, but if you do, you have the information. Okay. Now, hearing disabilities. It was funny because when I was reviewing this, I realized that I had a typo in there, and it said 1 million Americans have trouble hearing. And I said, well, that's definitely not right. So I'm glad I double checked. It's 11 million people who have trouble hearing. Again, like visual, it may be mild to extensive. About 30% of people, again, over the age of 65, we talked about this with aging and prevalence of disability. So it's right there again. And then there's different communication methods. Each person has their own preference. As I mentioned a couple of times, I may be deaf, another person may be deaf. I may not do sign language. Maybe I got my deafness when I was older, and maybe the person had their deafness when they were younger, but we're both deaf, but we don't use the same communication. So never make assumptions about that. People sometimes lip read. Certainly people do signing, which is called American Sign Language. That's again what you're seeing on the training. the TTY phones. I'm not sure if you know what they look like, but they're like a little typewriter, and then you put the phone on the headset on it. It's a little archaic. It's a little antiquated. You will see sometimes TTY phones, again, because people have cell phones now and different types of audio outputs, tablets and computers. TTY phones aren't that. They're just not as prevalent. It's kind of like Braille. It's kind of going out. But if you do see TTY, you'll know what it's for. Basically, it's someone calling as a third person to be able to communicate between you as, in this case, a business owner and someone, like say for myself, if I had a hearing disability, maybe I want to call and find out what your hours are. Maybe I want to talk to someone. And so maybe I use a TTY phone. So that's just another example. Computers, we just talked about how they are a significant portion of communication for people with different hearing levels of disabilities. And then writing. And as I mentioned, some people literally do use pen and paper, and there is nothing wrong with that. I'm going to tell you right now, as a business owner, I would never really invest in a sign language interpreter unless it's a grand opening, a special event. You know, let's say that you have a business that sells jewelry, okay? And, you know, someone's going to put some money into that. They want to spend $3,000, $5,000 on a piece of jewelry. Now, I know many of the stores have a nice, you know, sitting area. They're going to give you excellent customer service. They're probably going to want to try to give you a drink. They get you nice and comfortable, okay? And the thing is that, you know, if I'm a person who uses sign language interpreter and I know that I want to come visit this place and I know the level of interaction, I might say to the business, again, maybe using TTY, maybe an email, and I will say, I'm a person who uses sign language. I'm going to come in on this day, and if it's possible, I would really like a sign language interpreter. Now, again, you're not going to get that if you're going to buy T-shirts and, you know, tourist tchotchkes. You know, we're talking about situations where there's consultation. Let's say you have an IT business. You may be doing consultation. If there's any that level of customer service, when it gets beyond just a transactional, it's like consultation, I would at least think about that as an option to have a sign language interpreter. But again, you would want to advertise that. Again, we'll talk about that in the fourth session. I've not seen a lot of businesses do that, but just like employment, a lot of employers are under the misnomer that if someone who's deaf works there, they need a sign language interpreter there all the time. That is usually not the case. And so it's exceptional situations. And so for business owners, I would certainly say the same thing, that it's not too often, but do know if it's a consulting situation, I would definitely. Now, sign language interpreters are mandatory. Let's say there's a small private medical, office. When it comes to medical and legal, those are situations where this business must provide. If that's their effective communication, then they do need to provide that. Okay, those are the exceptional situations. Human speech is often the most challenging sound and most difficult to hear when there's a lot of ambient noise. So, making sure, so when I do trainings, when I've got folks who may be deaf or hard of hearing, just as a practice, I always wear my hair back because I don't know if they're lip reading. So I always make sure that my face is clear of any, obstructions like hair, and just making sure that there's no outside noises, because again, that can really affect someone's ability to hear all the information. I can imagine in a small business where there's a lot of things going on, you got customers, maybe you got outside noise with the safaris, and so forth. So, it may be a little difficult for you to control, but I have also walked into stores where there's absolutely beautiful music going on. It's very calm and it's soothing and it's quieter. And sometimes those are a little bit easier actually to frequent because there's not so much chaos. And for people who got hearing disabilities, that can be more than a distraction. It may be a deterrent. They're like, that's just too busy for me, what's going on. But, maybe they'll come back when it's a quieter time to your business. But keep that in mind. Sometimes when businesses, especially I can imagine during tourist season, they do get very busy. But, so that's just a challenge that's just there to kind of deal with. And just know that hearing aids may not totally fix the whole problem. Just because someone has a hearing aid doesn't mean, okay, problem is solved. There might still be some residual hearing issues. So just keep that in mind as a generalness, okay? Now, etiquette. To get a person's attention, gently wave or tap the person on the shoulder. Again, as we talked about visual, you want to make sure that you know the etiquettes for a different kind of sensory disability. Look directly at the person when you're speaking. Make a true effort to communicate. Don't try to be polite by saying you understand when you don't. I can't tell you how many times I hear that over and over. And again, as a small business, I would think that you want to make sure your communication is exactly on point, because at some point, there's probably going to be money exchanging, and you want to make sure that that person absolutely knows what they're buying. If they have questions, again, it's if you're saying you understand them and then all of a sudden you have two different prices going on, that's going to be a problem. So again, you don't have to be polite to say you understand. Just say, I don't understand that. Could you write it down for me? Those are all very good etiquettes, and it's not disrespectful. When someone else is signing, look directly at the person who's deaf, not at the signer. Now, you may have someone who comes into your establishment. There was someone who signs. Maybe it's their friend, maybe it's their family, maybe they have a sign language interpreter. But regardless, if they're the ones asking the question, they're the ones you look at, not the person who's signing. Because again, when it comes to customer service, it's always about that person. If you start to look at the other person, then that, I can tell you, that's a turn off. That person will leave your store, because they want to be treated like any other customer. Wait, I'm the one asking the question. I'm the one, okay? We talked about numerous times about pen and paper. The other thing with hearing disabilities is not to change a topic of conversation quickly or without warning. Maybe you're talking about one of your services or your merchandise, and then you switch real quick to another one. Just make that transition just a little slower. Again, most importantly, at the end of the day, you want to be able to make a sales. And so I'm trying to give you all the etiquettes that'll keep someone in the store without offending them and having good, really natural customer service. And again, it's okay if you don't get it right away, but I can tell you that the sooner that you're able to embrace this, because there are so many people with disabilities who do have money, the sooner you can get on this bandwagon of expanding your customer service base, okay? So communication is very, very important. And again, bottom line is communicate your willingness to serve the person. Facial expressions can say a lot, okay? And so just keep that in mind. Again, I go back to the trainings that you probably give your staff for customer service or your little in-service. I'm sure there's a lot of things that are mainstays or core of good customer service. And that always includes eye contact, willingness to serve the person, good body language, and so forth. So some of this, again, we go back to common sense and good customer service in general. I want to briefly talk about developmental disabilities. It's not a large population, but they certainly are here. And the fact is, sadly, a lot of people who had developmental disabilities were shunned, were institutionalized, all sorts of really medical, really tragedy. So this is a very special population in that respect, because they have been through a lot, and they want to be treated like anyone else, like everybody else we talk about with a disability. About 1 to 2% of the population has a developmental disability. And I don't know if you caught what I said was special about them, but I would say the same thing for any group who has persevered and been through tragedy. So I want to put that caveat out there. Again, can arise from a number of different causes. Just so you know, developmental disabilities typically are either congenital, meaning they start at birth, or they can be acquired up to the age of 22. That's what's considered a developmental disability. There's varying levels of developmental disabilities. These are not mental illness, two different things. And many people with developmental disabilities can read and write. Again, we fall back to the stereotype. Let's say you had someone with a developmental disability come into your store, and you might be like, oh, they're probably not going to know what I'm saying, or we'll just see if they ask any questions. You want to treat them like any other customer coming in. I'll say it once, I'll say it 100 times. You don't know what that person's got in their pocket when it comes to money. And so you know, it's kind of like, you know, if you think that a certain population is not going to, you know, be a good customer, well then, you know, why would you ever make an effort? You just attending this, excuse me, I'm sorry. You just attending this training lets people know with disabilities that you are making an effort and that you are trying to find the right balance between, you know, making your place accessible, making your place welcome, and continuing to run your business, particularly through a pandemic. Okay. You know, some do have some difficulty making choices. Some have people with them. Some people don't. A lot of times people have someone with them. Excuse me, I apologize. So some etiquette. Now, in this case, sometimes you do want to speak just a little bit slower. Not that you want to distort your voice, but, you know, just speak slow and methodically. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Use concrete or reasoning, avoid abstractions. And that's something, you know, some people with developmental disabilities are just very concrete person. And this is the true of some people without disability. It's all how you take in information. So a lot of people with developmental disabilities do better if it's concrete. Don't assume anything. There's a wide range in capacities or capabilities of people with DD. Now, I don't know if anybody has this thing called Pluto TV. I've been watching them. They keep advertising this thing, the show called Born to Be Me or something. I can't quite remember the title. It's all about people with developmental disabilities, particularly Down syndrome. And the girl said it right. She said, I'm not going to let my Down syndrome stop me. And, you know, when you think about that attitude, when you think about younger people saying, not only is it not going to stop me, I'm part of society. They're the ones that are going to be coming to your store. They're the ones that are going to expect good customer service. And if they don't, they will let everybody know and their uncle. And, you know, again, disability or not, we know reputation can get sunk by one bad experience. But I just think of that young girl who said, I'm not going to let it stop me. Those are your next customers. Those are the ones who are going to want to come into a store, feel like they're the most important customer, like every customer is, and to be treated just like anybody else. Okay, so that was the overview of different types of disabilities and etiquette. Now I want to end with this part with service animals, because you can have any disability. Most people are used to people who have visual disabilities with a service animal, but you can have any of the disabilities that I mentioned have service animals. If sometimes businesses will say, well, I saw someone coming in and they had a service animal and they were blind. I don't think that's a service animal. But there's so many reasons. You've got people who have epilepsy, who have dogs who can sense a seizure. You've got same thing with diabetes. You've got some that have mental health, that's for the anxiety. You have some, of course, for mobility. You might have someone who uses a wheelchair and a service animal. So service animals can be far and wide in terms of people who use them. Now, not to get confused, because as a business owner, you do not want to get into this whole pet and comfort or therapy animals. Those are under a different regulation. The Americans with Disabilities Act only talks about service animal. And again, we talked about the fact that they are allowed in public places. Comfort therapy animals are a little bit different. They are more related to fair housing and the Air Carrier Access Act. So a little bit different. You do not need to allow a comfort animal or a therapy animal. They're not considered a service animal in your store. If you want to, you can, but you don't have to. A service animal does not have to wear a jacket or be formally trained. A lot of people with disabilities will put a jacket on the dog just so they don't get harassed. If they don't wear a jacket, people won't believe them. They think they have to wear a jacket, and that's just not the case. When a service animal does not wear a jacket, it's still considered a service animal. And I can tell you there's no part of the ADA where it says that service animals must be formally trained. The whole purpose of why they put that regulation in place is because there are some animals who just absolutely get along with their owners. They have a special bond and they can train that animal. They do not need to send it to formal training. And that was the whole reason, so that people with disabilities wouldn't be under the pressure of sending their dogs for formal training, because again, some pet owners have the bond that they can train their own dogs. Animals that are excluded, including certain breeds of dogs and snakes. Yes, snakes are included, thank God, because I am terrified of snakes. Most of them are dogs, and sometimes there are mini horses. I tried to find a picture of a mini horse. I couldn't quite fit it on with the dogs, but they're really darling. They're like semi-large dogs, you know. I would say like the Labrador, and most of the times I've seen them wearing sneakers. So they're just darling things. You want to pet them, but you know, horses bite a lot. But these are also considered service animal. So mini horses and dogs are the most common. Dogs, I would say 80–90% of the time, but don't be surprised if you see a mini horse come through your door. They are allowed to. And so just, you know, things are changing and it's just a sign of the time, but there are certain dogs and breeds and certain animals that are not included. Service animal has formal etiquette, unlike a pet. You will know as a business owner when there is a service animal. A service animal will stay by their owner. A service animal 9 out of 10 times will not bark. A service animal will never run around a store. A service animal will not feces or do any kind of bowel movement in your store. That's the sign. A lot of business owners ask me, well, they weren't wearing a jacket. How do I know? Well, that's how you know. If you see this animal running around and not staying by their, the person with disability, that's really not a service animal, okay? So you can just go by the etiquette of a service animal to know truly if that's a service animal. It's not like a pet. A pet would sometimes run around and have a good time, not a service animal. Never touch a service animal while it's working. And a person can have a service animal for many reasons, as I mentioned. And number one rule, again, if this is one of the takeaways from tonight, is an establishment cannot ask for documentation of the service animal, but what they can ask is this a service animal trained to do a task for you? And that's all you can ask. And if they say, yes, it is, then you allow that service animal in and you will know, as I mentioned, the etiquette of that animal. If they say, no, it's not, then you can say, well, I'm sorry, we don't allow non-service animals in our business and you are not breaking the law. Because if you ask the question and they say no, then it is not considered a service animal. Okay. So let's wrap this up by asking our last polling question. After all of this conversation we had for the last good 45 minutes, I'm just curious to know, how comfortable do you feel serving customers with disability? Yes, no, depends on the situation. So again, I feel comfortable serving customers with disabilities. Yes, no, depends on the situation. And again, honesty is the best. So, you know, if you don't feel comfortable, that is okay. Okay, Mary Jo, do we have the results? Okay, that's great. That's great. And I think it's a very honest answer to say it depends on the situation. In the field of disability, I can tell you there's some disabilities that a lot of people don't really get squeamish about. You know, somebody uses a wheelchair, you know, maybe someone got a back impairment, someone maybe had, you know, maybe cancer or something. But where people get real squeamish and really unsure are the ones who, as I talked about with neurological disabilities, definitely mental health if they even express it. So it's a very good, it's good to see that, because I think that, you know, at the end of this whole conversation, we're still talking about people to people. people to people. And before we look at the bottom line, before we talk about, what walks through the door, the color green, people are people. And if people have a better sense of how to serve customers with disabilities, I mean, we already talked about, not only the monetary gains, but again, you know how it works. One person has a good experience, they're going to tell a lot of people. And I can tell you right now, people with disabilities are some of the most loyal customers you will ever have. Okay? So thank you for that, Mary Jo. Okay. All right, we're going to just take these last few minutes before we start to hand it over to SBDC for some stuff. I want to talk a little bit about the resources. Now, I mentioned to you that there are some resources that you can have your staff participate on. Again, if we had time, I would show you this DOJ video, 10 small business mistakes. I have to tell you, for DOJ, it's quite funny. It's actually very comedic. And it's a little bit old, but I think it's a great thing because they show a small business excuse, and then it's a vignette, and then you can pause it, and then you can talk about it with your staff. And it's things like, well, Harry's not doing it next door. Why the heck should I do it? Or, I never even thought about a person with disability. They don't come through our door. They really talk like that, and it's just great. A lighthearted video. Again, it's set up so you can have discussions with these vignettes. Again, I encourage you to check it out. Great video. The DOJ online training, reaching out to customers. Now, this link will take you to that, but I apologize because there should have been a little bit longer link. But if you just Google that, you will find it with Department of Justice. This is a training module online, and you can, I believe there's 10 or 11 topics. And, maybe you're going to tell your staff, you know what, we're gonna get our hands around disability. I think once a month, we should start looking at this online training and see what we can benefit from. So there's another kind of continued professional development opportunity. And then Cornell University, again, the Northeast ADA Center has a small business page as well. And many of the slides, the information, some of the stories, it was when I was with the Northeast ADA Center. So again, they're just a wealth of resources. Again, I wish we had time. I will show you some of that. One of the links I will mention when we get to it is their link for COVID. Now, as a small business, this is a web portal that you should definitely get to know well, and you should probably bookmark it because they've got everything from the trainings I mentioned to different kinds of briefs and different kinds of publications that talk about, reaching that market, aging and disability. It talks about expanding your market. It's got information for hotels and motels in terms of customer service. So just a wealth of information. Again, in the video gallery is where you'll find that 10 small business mistake. And again, this is something I would just put as a bookmark and just have it as a fingertip resource to you. We could spend 3 hours probably going over the resources. It's that much, okay? And I just want to end the resources talking about a little bit about what's going on. We know with the pandemic, certainly small businesses have really gotten the brunt of a lot of it. And so we want to be able to provide you some information, not just specific to COVID, but resiliency during the pandemic and other disasters, of course. The National Disability Institute, they have a financial resiliency for people with disabilities. So if you know someone or you're a person with a disability, this is a great resource. It's everything from understanding stimulus checks, how to keep your budget intact while you're going through changes. There's such thing called the ABLE Act, which is specific for disability. So just tons of information, a lot about resiliency. Another one I want to mention is SCORE, which is a nonprofit resource for businesses funded by SBA. And this is, again, their small business resiliency page in the link. And again, tons of information, business continuity, risk management, all of that's in there. And then there was another one. I thought this was really neat because this is actually under the UN's Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and it's called ARISE. And again, talking about business resiliency, business continuity, prevention, and things like that. So just a few links for you in terms of resiliency, whether it's for persons with disabilities or for your business. Last but not least, we'll wrap it up with some COVID resources. Again, otherwise I would be in front of you. So again, the Small Business Administration has a COVID page. the U.S. Chamber. The federal EEOC, Equal Opportunity Commission, has one. And again, if you've got some employees with disabilities or some health condition, this is a very good page for you to get more information. We at the Disability Rights Center also have a COVID page. We focus a lot on also special education for parents. So if you know someone who has a child in special education, we've got resources for that as well. There's also COVID in the ADA. U.S. Department of Justice, they've got some resources, but they actually put out a guidance because some people were saying that for masks, they didn't have to wear them because of masks, and then they were pulling out the ADA. So the Department of Justice addressed that in the statement. Now, usually I use resources that are federal, national, but I just happened to check this one out, and I thought they did a really good job of how a business under the ADA deals with Corona. And this is an FAQ, and I thought they did a really good job. So I don't ever endorse anybody, especially nobody who's legal or any kind of that, but the information was accurate, and I just thought it was a very good FAQ, so I put it out there. And then, as I mentioned, the Northeast ADA Center, they have, again, a wealth of information for coronavirus, a lot of it for businesses. And so please check them out. Again, if I was a little bit more tech savvy, I would have had us jump on that. But with that, the timing is just about right. We're about 10 of before 8. I want to hand it back over to SBDC and just thank you so much for your time and your interest. And Mary Jo, if you want to take it from there with a Q&A.
Miss Desiree Joseph said that her website is in progress, so she's working at making that ADA compliant. Is that correct, Ms. Joseph? You can unmute your mic.
They say Democrats do this too. So is that what this is?
I don't want to unmute my mic.
Party or anyone else.
Yes.
Doesn't matter.
Yes, she's saying that's correct. Okay, do we have any other questions? You can put them in the chat or you can unmute your mic since we have a relatively small group. But while we're waiting for that, Shami, should I send them this presentation or are you going to send me the revised one?
Let me send you the revised. I think this should be the same one, but just 100%. I can certainly follow up. But I do believe this is the one, so.
The one you sent yesterday?
Yeah.
Okay, so I can put it in the chat.
Yeah, because there's your end slide too. Yep.
Okay, well, on behalf of the Virgin Islands Small Business Development Center and the Disability Rights Center, we want to thank you all for joining us today for serving customers with disability. This is the second in the series of 4 webinars. And if you'll hold on for a second, I'll put a copy of the presentation in the chat so you can have that to view.
And Mary Jo, also the evaluation link?
The evaluation link. I forgot the evaluation link. Okay, give me a second. I have to go back for that.
Okay. If anybody has questions, feel free to ask.
While I look for that evaluation link.
The woman who mentioned she's doing her website, is that something that you're doing in-house or are you consulting with someone?
Consultant.
Wonderful. You know, a lot of times it's just very overwhelming in terms of getting to the website in general is, and then making it accessible. So good. And this is someone who knows how to do how to make it accessible in terms of the website.
I believe they do. I have a training tomorrow with them, so I will inquire
If you would like, Desiree, I would be happy to follow up with you. I'm actually working with someone in VI who is doing this also. So, you know, the most important thing is what we see a lot of times, small businesses, they spend money on something that's supposed to be accessible. And at the end of the day, it didn't turn out that way. So I'd hate for anybody to get in that situation. So if you're unsure that they do accessibility, you know, there's a few questions you definitely want to ask them in terms of, like, can a screen reader read this? You know, how are there descriptions on the pictures or any kind of illustration? Just stuff like that. And if you would like a little, you know, a little bit more insight, I can definitely connect you with our social media person who has a little bit of information on that, just to give you an idea of what you should be asking. And that way you'll feel sure that, yes, they are doing what I need them to do.
I got a question.
Yes.
Kind of pit bull, you mentioned about different breeds that are exempted. Can a pit bull be a service dog?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry, what were you asking about service dogs? I'm sorry.
Yes, kind of pit bull, the breed. Can
Oh,
a pit bull be a service dog?
Yes.
Because somebody came to our establishment with a pit bull and they said it was a service dog.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a pit bull can be considered a service dog when the what am I trying to say? The guidance that came out with the EOC, they actually specifically mentioned Doberman pinchers, which I was rather surprised. And so I believe pit bulls, I can double check for, is this Mr. Knight by chance?
No, this is Brumant, Megan's
okay.
authority.
Oh, okay. If you want, I can send you some specific like information and regulations around that if you would like, just to be 100%. You know, you can, you have my contact information. So I could definitely follow up with you with the pit bull thing, but I don't believe that is one breed that is, I know there's been a lot of controversy, but again, when it's all how you raise the dog. And so for a service animal, obviously a pit bull, if it's aggressive, it's not going to be a good service dog, but a lot of pit bulls are not aggressive. So there's been a lot of back and forth. So with that, but again, I'd be more than happy to follow up about that with the pit bulls.
Okay, Mr. Jennings put in the chat that all dogs, no matter what breed, can be service animals.
Okay, okay.
Very good.
Sounds good. And Mr. Jennings is a service animal guru, so he would know. Very good. I just know there was some controversy for some time, but I would only want to give it to you, you know, accurately. So thank you for jumping in there. Sounds good.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, now next week we have our third webinar, and we're going to have some information that's more specific to building codes.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of, can you elaborate on that, Shami, a little bit, please?
Sure. We're going to talk about what we call accessible elements, and this will include things that are the most common things that we think of for a small business, like service counters, parking, bathrooms, if you have them, you know, if you're a restaurant, you know, maybe restaurant layouts. And then we're going to talk about checklists for existing facility. It's a great resource. Want to make sure small businesses know how to access that and also how to use it. This is very helpful for businesses who are not new construction. It's particularly made for them. And then we'll also talk about different venues, whether it's a boutique hotel, whether it's a restaurant, just depending on the venue. We're going to talk about that as like case scenarios. So we'll put some application to these codes and stuff.
Okay, so that should be a really good session. So we're looking forward to seeing you guys next week, Thursday, 6 p.m. for the third webinar in the ADA Primer webinar series. And we thank you all for coming. Tell somebody, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Everyone stay well. Take care.